I'm Dr. David Bernstein, and welcome back to our series, 25 Tips for Working with Modes. Now, in the first 10 videos in this series, we talked about, how to intervene with modes when modes are active in the present moment, right? So you've got a heavy-duty mode in the room with you, and, how do you learn to recognize which mode is it, starting with observation, and then choose an effective intervention for working with that mode. Okay, now in the second part of this series, we're going to talk about helping patients to build mode awareness. How do you help them to become more aware of their own modes, including in those moments when they're triggered? And how do you help them to see the long-term self-defeating patterns in their lives that are based on modes and learn to break those patterns? And so now we're going to embark on the first video in the second part of our series, Show It. Now, let's talk a little bit about mode awareness. How do we build mode awareness? Well, why is it important to build mode awareness? Well, because, when patients' modes are triggered in the present moment, those modes act kind of as blinders. Those are blinders that, determine how patients think and how they feel and how they cope at that moment. And what we would like them to do is to kind of, expand their field of awareness. When patients become aware, oh my God, am I in a mode right now? And which mode is it? All of a sudden, they can exercise their free choice. Do I want to, give in to my old self-defeating patterns, or do I want to initiate new and healthier forms of coping? Now, one of the things I'm sure that you've noticed is that patients vary a lot, in their capacity for awareness, self-awareness, and self-reflection. And, for some patients, when you introduce the concept of modes, you can just give a very brief explanation to them and then start, talking to them about, ways in which, modes may relate to their lives, And what you're going to find for some patients is that that process goes very quickly and very easily. Now, for other patients, it can be a much, much more slow and painstaking process. And why is that? Because these are patients who have much less developed healthy adult capacities. And self-awareness is one of the very most important functions of the healthy adult mode. And for these kinds of patients, the way I tend to think about it is that we want to do a variety of interventions over a period of time to help them build up their capacity for mode awareness. And each time we do one of those interventions, it's like, putting just simply a drop of water in a bucket, in a nearly empty bucket. And each time we do another intervention, it's just simply adding another drop of water to that bucket. And over time, that bucket becomes fuller and fuller. And that represents, their growing capacity for mode awareness or self-reflection, or, what some people refer to as mentalization capacity, right? So that bucket becomes fuller over time. And that makes a crucial difference in their ability to, cope in different ways when they're emotionally triggered and break those long-term patterns. Now, what kinds of interventions am I talking about? Well, we've already talked about one of them quite frequently in the first 10 videos in the series, and that is the intervention of using the mode language of a side of you that. I see a side of you that, and then simply describe what you see. Now, every time you do that, it's like holding up a mirror to the patient. It's like saying, reflecting back to the patient, here's the mode that I see in you right now. And again, every time, you do that, there's this little moment of self-awareness, that little drop. And even if it's a fleeting moment, that's another drop of water in that bucket, that over time gets filled up. Now, one of the things you may have noticed in the previous videos is that, when, we talked about using this kind of mode language, that I almost always accompany it by an image. One of the images from our iModes tool. And why is that? Well, because the use of images in combination with this kind of intervention can make the intervention even more effective. And why is that? Well, the whole rationale for why I developed the iModes, over 10 years ago, was that in working with some more severe patients, I saw how limited they were in being able to grasp that mode language, that it seemed that just simply talking about modes was really not enough. And in some cases, I'd even see patients kind of mimicking what I was saying, but, to what degree did it really sink in? And then, when we developed these images and started to use them, I found that, we got much better results. And so let's take an example of that. Let's say that you see a patient and he seems quite detached. And then you use this intervention. You say, hey, I see a side of you that seems kind of distant right now, maybe a little detached from your feelings, a little numb. Okay, now this kind of intervention, could be very helpful. It often is helpful. But what if you accompany that very same intervention with this image? So imagine you say the same words to the patient, and then you hand them the card with this image. You say to the patient, hey, I see a side of you right now that seems kind of distant, kind of emotionally detached, a little numb. Do you recognize this in yourself? You hand them the card, and then the patient looks at it, looks at the image, and, explores it, in his or her own way, maybe turns the card over, sees the name of the mode on the back, and, maybe reads the text. Well, what we've found is that, when the intervention of the mode, using the mode language is accompanied by this kind of image, it makes the intervention more effective. And part of the reason for that is because, as we've talked about earlier, in this series, images amplify emotions, right? We talked about that earlier in the context of, using imagery and schema therapy, that when you ask patients to close their eyes and visualize a particular situation, it tends to amplify or intensify the emotions that were involved in that situation. Well, the same thing is true for the use of cartoon images. And in developing the iModes, we used a well-known technique in cartooning where we simplified the images. We took out, all of the extraneous details. And, this is a method that has also been shown in research to amplify emotions. So for example, there's research that shows that when you show somebody a cartoon image of a face, that people much more readily recognize, which emotion is being expressed by that face as compared to seeing an actual photograph of that same face. So there does seem to be something about particularly this process of simplifying images, and in the literature it's called amplification through simplification. By simplifying an image and taking away its extraneous detail, then we can amplify the emotion that's associated with this image. And so again, you can imagine the difference between saying, hey, I see a side of you right now that seems kind of sad and lonely and is, maybe, feeling like, like there's nobody who's there for you or you're all alone. And saying that accompanied by this image, again, this image is likely to have much more of an emotional impact. And so what we want to do using imagery, and this is true when it comes to, using, imagery rescripting and using these cartoons, is we want images that, help people to be in a kind of optimal zone of emotional amplification. We want them to feel a little bit of what that mode is, because we don't want people to just simply understand modes in an intellectual way. We want them to feel their modes so that at the moment when their modes are triggered, they can feel it. They can feel it in their body. They know what that feels like. They know what it's like. Okay. And now we're going to continue with this topic next time. We're going to talk about, the role of narratives and storytelling in helping people to develop mode awareness. And that'll bring us to our video for next week, Tell It. And please come to our website, www.imodes.com, and take a look at our image-based therapy tools. Have a great week and see you next time.